The Zelda series is widely known for its elaborate and luscious worlds, its divisive yet innovative gameplay, and its confusing yet fascinating chronology. It's one of those franchises that's super easy to compare and contrast elements from game to game, since with each passing installment they consistently try to add a new flavor. The last two main series titles were just about polar opposites of each other, but neither could ever exist without the other. Their connection links together the entire series. What's up my homies? It's Edible Incredible, and today I'll be covering how these two games coexist, not just in terms of story, but also gameplay. Let's firstly start with the obvious basics. The world constructed in Skyward Sword was so restrictive in terms of its freedom, especially when being compared to its predecessors, aka the environments of Twilight Princess and the Wind Waker. But despite this non-existent element, Nintendo instead strived to flesh out this world with its characters and lore, creating an emphasis on a much more linear progression. This opened the doors to expand the overall story as we knew it, by depicting an age that came well before what we previously believed to be the most ancient version of Hyrule. It's supernatural for a game to be more confined when attempting to deliver an impactful narrative. Just look at Final Fantasy XV for instance. The game started out pretty open before the gameplay took a 180 to simply cater to the plot progression, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It of course all comes down to personal preference, but in Skyward Sword's case, the entire journey is focused on presenting this narrative. When up to 2011, the Zelda series was always gameplay first. Now this might still have been the case for Skyward Sword, but the story took a massive leap forward in terms of development motives, slightly changing the foundation to what we know as a traditional Zelda installment. Then came Breath of the Wild. The majority of the fans' cries were not in vain, as we were granted a fully explorable world that plain and simply made its money on the concept of freedom, echoing back to the very first Zelda. However, like anything, this transition came with its sacrifices. Classic Zelda dungeons and a fleshed out narrative were fairly lacking, and now fans wildly crave for these elements to re-emerge in its sequel. Already, the first trailer seems to indicate that this game will also be story focused, while the gameplay side of things, as I'm writing this at least, is still very much a mystery. But I'd bank on a combination of Breath of the Wild shrine puzzles and Skyward Sword's innovative take on traditional dungeons. It's just the natural order of things when making a sequel. For instance, you can see a whole lot of influence in Skyward Sword from Twilight Princess and the Wind Waker. A prime example would be the beautiful blend of art styles. Now in terms of story, these two titles share a unique bond. One showcases the beginning of it all, while the other presents the beginning of the end. Demise's famous final words still prove to be a major factor, as Calamity Ganon is a reincarnate that is purely fueled by hatred itself. Hatred that of course was originally spawned by Demise's breath. The question is, will we finally see the conclusion to this malice in Breath of the Wild 2? Or at least, the true source to this malice? Or will it never perish, sparking yet another era of demonic rule? Speaking of what the future could hold, Skyward Sword was actually the first 3D Zelda to tease vocal performances. Sure, Toon Link had a wide arsenal of sound effects, but nothing too complex. In Skyward Sword, we don't just get Link miming a complete story to Zelda's dad, but also an entire song sang by Zelda herself. It really gave her that much more character than ever before. Now, of course, in Breath of the Wild, we were finally introduced to full-fledged voice acting. But I have a strong feeling that this is yet another element that has just surfaced. They didn't want the average Zelda fan feeling overburdened by so many nuances. So this time around, because of what Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild slowly introduced to us vocally, I believe we are finally ready to get a full set of voice lines for the villain, and for a few more traditional main characters in this sequel, no matter if that ends up being Ganondorf or not. Something else that Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword paved the way for was the nature of travel. Skyward Sword with the Loftwing, and Breath of the Wild with glitches. Wow! Okay, no, but for real, the evolution of the paraglider. From Skyward Sword's stiff and stationary feel to Breath of the Wild's free and unrestricted nature. I'm pretty sure that the paraglider will return in the sequel. But I also have a hunch that there'll be another cool means of travel as well. In conclusion, these two games have helped to broaden the franchise with their diversity, and helps to set the stage for the future by potentially fusing together the best of both worlds from each of these two titles, with an emphasis on combining linearity and non-linearity in each of their independent environments. A fun way to look at it is that Breath of the Wild 2 is yet another descendant that's actively learning from its ancestors, stitching together what works and what doesn't work from before, to hopefully craft something that's even more groundbreaking. And well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what elements from each of these two games that you would love to see in Breath of the Wild 2 the most. Thanks for listening, and as always, I hope you all stay hyped. Peace. Scuba da booba da booba, how might I take your scuba da booba?